Good afternoon. I often get asked the question from folks about the best way to attach two different data sets that have a common ID. And there are folks out there who are really familiar with doing this in Excel. And Excel does have a method for doing this. It's called VLOOKUP. And it does work, but it can be a bit spotty, and it tends to be pretty slow. And so the way that I do this is actually using a statistical package called R. And the method is not, specific to R. You can do this in Python, or you can do this in sort of a database framework. But rather than doing a VLOOKUP that's going to search through all of the different records vertically, what this is going to do is this is going to do a search that's more of a join type strategy. And there are a lot of advantages. The most important is speed. So let me walk you through a really common business problem and show you the VLOOKUP method, and then show you how I would do this in R. So I'm going to pop open this data set that's called baseball. I tend to use baseball data because I think it's fairly intuitive to a lot of people, at least Americans. This might not play so well for a global audience, but what you're looking at here is you're looking at a bunch of individual baseball players who played for a subset of teams: the Houston Astros, the Colorado Rockies, and the Washington Nationals. And each one of these players started playing for that team in a particular year. So imagine that you were sent a data set, and it's a bunch of customers, and it's a bunch of data about those customers. And then there's a particular research question that you have, and in order to answer that, you need a separate data set. And so here I have all these baseball players, and sorry that that I have to scroll from the bottom, but here you have all the baseball players with this common ID, the city in which they were born, the state in which they were born, as well as the year in which they were born. And also, respectfully, state also could involve the state that's not in the U.S., because a lot of baseball players are from overseas. So let's say that someone asked the question, what is the average age at which baseball players in this data set started playing for their respective teams? In order to answer that question effectively, you need to get this birth year connected up to this year in which they first started playing for this team. And so that's what requires this VLOOKUP functionality. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what you should always do when manipulating data, and that's make a copy of the original data. So I'm going to make a copy of the batters tab, and I'm going to make a copy of the birth info tab. And I'm going to rename these. So I'm going to call this batters, and I'll just do ORIG for original. That's probably not the best naming convention, but that way, if anything happens to our data file, or if I do anything silly or ridiculous, I can always go back and make sure that I have the original data set. You never, ever, ever want to manipulate your raw data. So let's save this and make sure that we're in good shape. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I would like to add a column here, and I am going to call this birth year. And here's how you do VLOOKUP. You hit an equals to get to add a function, and then it's VLOOKUP. Now VLOOKUP, if you go up here, it has 4 different conditions that the function is looking for. The first is the lookup value, which is this ID. Then you hit a comma to move on to the next one. The second one is the table array. And the table array is going to be all of this information. So we're going to start way at the top here and go all the way to the bottom here. There's over 10,000 records in this. Then the third argument that this function is looking for is what's called the column index number. And so we want this 4th column, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to punch in 4 so it knows which column we're looking for when it does find the match. And then last but not least, it's asking us if a partial or a fuzzy match or an exact match is required. We're going to punch in false here so that it's an exact match. And when you run that, it populates this number right here. So 1934 is the year that this individual was born. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag this all the way down to fill in that column. So we're going to go right like this, hit the fill, then go down, boom. So now what you have is you have appended the birth year onto every single one of these individual records from a separate data set. Then what we're going to do is we are going to add the age in here. So, we can do equals, we'll call this start age. And then, of course, we just have to do some basic math here. The age that they started is the year that that they started playing minus their birth year. And so this individual was at 28, and you can see these different birth years. There are some null values in here which are throwing this error, which actually is going to cause me some problems in a minute. But I will stop with that function and go ahead and fill all the way down so that you now have all of these data for at least everyone for whom the data are available populated in here. So that's kind of the VLOOKUP method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this so that we have access to that information. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how I would actually do this in R, so that if you wanted to do this in a reproducible way and in a much faster way, you certainly can. So pop over here to R. This is what R looks like. This is a free statistical program called R. It's in this this development environment called RStudio, which is also free. But here's what we're going to do. Right now, our environment is empty and the console is empty, so we haven't done anything yet. What I'm going to read in are each one of these initial tabs as their own data frame. Then I'm going to join them together. Then I'm going to export them. So first thing I need to do is I need to change this to original because I actually want to pull in the original data frame. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code. This is from a library called Excel SX that is going to read Excel files directly in here and turn them into R data frames. So you can see that it's running this code up here. I'm wondering if I closed the actual file. I didn't, so we'll close it to make sure everything's good. And it'll take a second to read this in. There we go. And as you can see, this player's data frame with 1,500 observations and 22 variables came into the... So if you do head players, you can look and see that the data looks pretty similar to the original version. We're going to do the same with the birth information. So this is the tab that had the 10,000 or so birthdays and birth cities and all that information for the baseball players in this group. It's going to take a second because it's a longer, well, it's a narrower data file, so it probably won't take quite as long, even though it's quite a lot longer, but we'll see. This is a pretty big data frame, so this is taking a while. This must be a very boring video to watch. All right. And so now if you look at this command, you can see the birthdays. So here are the two tabs that were read directly from that Excel file. Now what I'm going to do is in this 5 lines of code, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a series of separate commands that calculate out all this information in just this little snippet of code. So here's what we're going to do. I'll walk through line by line. First, what we're going to do is we're going to name this data frame players. Now, we've already named a data frame players, so that's going to actually just overwrite this one that's up here. But the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to join the players data frame and the birth data frame. And since these both have this unique ID, player ID, it is going to look for any common columns and match on that. You can specify the column you want it to match on if they don't match, but in this case it should intuitively find it. Then we use this little pipe operator, which is going to ask for another command. And what that's going to do is we're going to compute this age of the first year by doing the year minus the birth year. And then what we're going to do is we're going to calculate an average age. We're going to calculate a new variable called average age, which is the average, the mean of this variable, the first year that we just built. One thing that's kind of nice is you're allowed to remove these NAs in R, so the problem of calculating averages in Excel kind of goes away. You don't have to write that big if error statement. You can just have it do only the average where the value is not an NA. And then finally, we want this data to be in the correct order because these two variables are going to get added way at the end of the file. And so in order to have these inserted in the right space, what we're going to do is we're going to set the order. So it's player ID, then year ID, then birth year, then the age of the first year that they played baseball, then the average age, then everything else. And then last but not least, we are going to call this a data frame. So once again, let's look off to the right. If you do head players, you can see that this data frame has 22 variables going across and 1,596 observations. After we run players now, it said over here, it joined by player ID. It now has 25 variables. And if you do head players, you can see the very top first few rows, and you can see that the birth year is attached, the age of the first year is attached, and the average age is 27.81864. And then all the rest of the data are there. Now here's an important part, because your client might want you to send this back to them in the format of Excel. So we've already looked at it. We think the data frame looks good. And just like we read the files into Excel, I'm going to write these back to the same Excel spreadsheet. So once again, let's make sure this data file is closed. It should be. We're going to write this new version of players into a sheet name called left join, which is right there. We're going to write that. And while it's doing that, what I would present is the fact that not only does this save time once you get the hang of it, but writing this code isn't really as hard as it looks. But the best part of reproducible code is that, let's say that this business problem comes up over and over and over, and the very next week, this same client is going to be asking you for the same information, but on updated records. You don't need to redo, all the clicking and dragging and moving around. You don't have to redo that. You don't have to build a macro. You just get to run this code every single time, and it should work. So now if we open up this baseball file again, it should have a new tab in it. It does, left join. And you can see that each of these columns that we added is in there, and you could just send this data file off or do whatever additional work you needed to do. So hopefully that's a bit of a helpful demo on how you can use the R statistical language in order to do some of your data munging. And maybe I've convinced someone out there to move in this direction rather than using VLOOKUP in Excel. Have a good one. Thanks.